We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, both Trismegistus and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above so below, as within so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos.
May the earth
be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash, the courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rijar. For these and more, we give thanks.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Daniel Gemario, the founder of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, co-founder of the school, and the creator of the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm. And I'm here with Mary Kern, the president of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And we're going to continue here our exploration, deep dives into different mystery schools. Now, previously, we have looked at the most recent one. We were looking at Gemini and Aries, which I thought was particularly appropriate, considering those are the current overtones of Venus and Mars. And then before that, we worked with Scorpio, Libra, and Capricorn. We are today going to go deeply into Aquarius and Taurus. There's a lot of really good reasons for that. And I'm going to be sharing this deep dive in the way that we've done it in the previous sessions, and collaboration and questioning and inquiry here with Mary. And I am noticing here as we're doing this today, this is the vlogcast that goes with the full moon newsletter. And this is the Magi moon. But I'm also noticing that as we're doing this now, the moon is right at the galactic edge. So we've got that particularly interesting window of transmission coming through just prior to the full moon, the Cancer full moon. So I'm just recognizing that as one of the energies that we're under here right now. I also, for those that maybe did not see the earlier vlogcasts on the Mystery School investigations here, we have included in the newsletter a link to the article about our way of looking at it, which is the Merlin situation that I had written about. And also we have provided links to the previous vlogcasts about those other 5 mystery schools. So this is new material for anyone. Do understand here that when we are in the school using the expression mystery school, that's our more expanded understanding of what are generally thought of as the signs. So the 12 signs are the 12 mystery schools of life. This is not to be confused with sun sign astrology. So therefore, this is not about, oh, I'm a Taurus. Are they talking about me today? Not necessarily. We're talking about the mystery schools of these that are represented by the signs of the name of those signs. The reason for us looking at Aquarius and Taurus today, for one hand, on one hand, we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius that so many people have been talking about, in which I did a conversation with Kaylin about that at our solstice call. There's a vlogcast that was about the subject last month. A lot of information about this is out there, some misinformation, some really good information. So I thought it would be really great to look more deeply into Aquarius, its history, its essence. And then because Uranus is in the sign of Taurus, we wish to also then look at deeply into Taurus, the mystery school. And part of that will be to see how they blend, if they can, what the contrast is between the two of them. Also, I'd like to say here at this point, and it's been a contention of our school and something I've thought about for a long time, that the usual sun sign descriptions of like Taurus and Aquarius or whatever sign we want to look at is almost always the shadow expression of those mystery schools, and has lost connection, in my opinion, to its essence. So the contention here is each of these 12 has an essence, an eternal essence, something that will always be true about it throughout history, whatever time period in history we're looking at. And I like to look at it at least for 300,000 years. So there's a certain essence to these 12. The 12 are essential. But depending upon what time in history we're in, there can be a different content to them. And this is really one of the essential understandings when we try to dive into what these schools of life are really all about. There will be the eternal essence, the contribution, or if we look at it from a spiritual perspective, creator, great mystery, the larger force that is behind our experience here. It's as if that creator energy allocates different essential qualities to different kinds of human beings, just like there would be different colors in the rainbow. So we'd have different expressions of humans. They're all equally valid. Although plenty of time periods in history, there will be a culture that prefers some over others. So over history, we get a different content to what, like we're going to talk about Aquarius here. What are we supposed to think about Aquarius? What is the essence of Aquarius? And then what has happened to its content? Even the content differences between the late 60s and today. It shifted. Or, and Mary, you and I have talked about this a lot, which is how in our school, there are certain signs, mystery schools, that are ones that are pretty radically reinterpreted by our school that are different than the sun sign descriptions. And one of them is Taurus. So to have a really different view of what the contribution of Taurus is. So this also one that we want to explore the essence, and then we wish to look and see what the shadow and light of it is. Actually, another way I like to look at it is that the mystery school's essence could have an evolution, but it also can have a devolution. There are different times in history where one is more at the leading edge and others are like more in the shadows, or they've over-identified themselves with their mistakes or their downside or their minefields. So we have evolution and devolution, but as we were discussing prior to our call today, in using the expression shadow and light, it might be useful to explain when in our school we use the expression shadow, what we mean by that. Because rather than thinking of it as something negative or evil or bad or demonic or, oh, the shadow, you know, it sounds pretty scary, okay? And also the word can be overused sometimes. What it is we're referring to would be an over-identification with characteristics and qualities that get stuck for a variety of different reasons. And then the other part of the definition would be, and this is partly Jung's view of it, it's the content of the unconscious that has not been brought to awareness, you know. So therefore, it's part of the school's objective and the paradigm's objective to assist people in uncovering these hidden features or over-identified features or things that become instinctual or automatic, and then we're not even aware that we're being run by it. So we're attempting to bring consciousness and awareness to these factors that can get stuck. So that's what we're meaning by this. And then actually, strangely enough, and we're going to dive into Aquarius right now, strangely enough, with the mystery school of Aquarius, its actual shadow is its over-identification with light. You know, so then that's when this whole conversation becomes very intriguing, and these words matter about how we're using them. Okay, I think that's enough of a little background on it. So let's go directly into Aquarius. For reasons stated about like Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius, the great mutation, the thing of moving into an approximately 800-year time period in history, which is dominated by air, the great mutation in Aquarius. So a lot about Aquarius, and I'm not going to go deeply right now into what I explored in a previous vlog about how the sign of Aquarius is not the same as the age of Aquarius, which is a constellation, not a sign. We want to put our focus here mainly on, completely just on the sign of Aquarius. There's a whole lot of ideas and concepts, because it is an air sign, that have been dancing around in my head as I've looked at this actually since 2017 about Aquarius, and having come out of the late 60s and the whole hype of the age of Aquarius, the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And I have noticed that a great deal of current astrological writing has looked at Aquarius as being a collectivist energy. So it's based, everybody together, a collectivity. Now, this is very, very, very interesting that this has been emphasized by current astrologers. One of the ways to begin to understand the sign of Aquarius is to connect it with its opposite, or its resonant polarity, which is Leo. Leo is about autonomy and sovereignty, and certainly personal selfhood. I don't think anyone would ever project collectivity on Leo. So the opposite of that would be Aquarius. And then you know, it gets connected to other kinds of concepts, like in the modern parlance of we are all one, or unity and diversity. It's even been connected to concepts of democracy. But now, interestingly, the shadow of that is really pretty evident, because also Aquarius has been associated with communism. It's also been associated with the collectivism that happens after the French Revolution, where the revolution eats its children, as it were. That or the shadow of democracy, which is the tyranny of the majority. Now, I'm bringing this up because I think it is leaving out something about Aquarius that has to be brought out at this point, which is its commitment to uniqueness and individuality. I gotta be me. Liberty and freedom. So rather than discussing the shadow of it, and I always like to bring this up, it's to me my favorite expression of the higher octave of Aquarius, or we can say the true intent of Aquarius, which relates to our school's very short, pithy definition of Aquarius, the mystery school, which is having the courage to go to the furthest extension of consciousness, to expand awareness and consciousness to as far as possible for its own sake. Now, this will be bringing up something we'll discuss a bit later, which is how Taurus and Aquarius are both in the self-exploration, self-interest mystery school. So Aquarius is not doing it for everybody else. It's just they have a commitment to expand their awareness. Now, this is how a triple Aquarius expresses it. A character by the name of Val Valerian, his journal was called The Leading Edge. And I love the leading edge expression for Aquarius. He says, all life forms should have the right and the opportunity to have an existence endowed with the freedom to produce the maximum amount of probable lines of reality in an evolving direction by choice, without repression of awareness or manipulation of physical, mental, or spiritual aspects. Be yourself. Now, I've also, just to take it to a slightly less philosophical approach here, the symbol for Aquarius, 2 waves. Now, that stems from the original imagery of the constellation, water. The constellation was water. But as it transformed into the sign, and as it got the information about how to create a sign-based zodiac, so Aquarius is an air sign. So then we get what? Electricity, or we get brain waves, so it's other kinds of waves rather than water. Now, the way I try to explain this in a more practical way when I have a client with a lot of Aquarius. So what are these 2 waves? One wave symbolizes something I think that would be true for Aquarius throughout history. And that would be its complete commitment to be absolutely and completely unique. I gotta be me. Or as that saying puts it, it's almost too obvious to say it this way, but gotta say it. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Or that marvelous t-shirt, that says, you laugh at me because I'm different, but I laugh at you because you're all the same. Now, that's a whole different flavor than joining the Borg. joining the hive, or being the mob, or being caught up in the revolution of the tyranny of the democracy, the tyranny of the majority, sorry. So, I mean, it's very tricky indeed, and I'm seeing how the confusion can be over this if we don't remember this commitment to the freedom aspect and to be yourself, not be like everyone else. I think they're trying to turn Aquarius into something that's more like the weak version of Libra, to be like everybody else. What's the other wave then? The other wave, and I know this is something you and I love to discuss, Mary. The other wave is the unique spiritual path of Aquarius Mystery School. And that is, we could say, the ground of consciousness itself. The high witness, the fair witness, the eye behind the eye, or using Native American understanding, which is particularly the case true now at this time in history, the eagle consciousness that flies highest, sees the biggest view as the most astounding objective freedom, objective awareness associated with Aquarius. How to be truly objective without subjective bias. And that means no judgments. The high witness does not judge, it just notices. So those two waves. I mean, I've always thought that Aquarius has these two sides. And so that also brings up the fact that until recently, both Uranus and Saturn were the so-called rulers of Aquarius. And this actually is fascinating because we can, these days, the emphasis is the Uranian aspect. The leading edge, the revolutionary, the seeing beyond the current, to boldly go into new territory and to be free of convention and so on. But Saturn also, and I think this is particularly important currently with Saturn in Aquarius, because Saturn wants to establish rules and regulations. Saturn wants to bring it into a form. Aquarius doesn't want that. Aquarius wants to be unbounded and free. So, good grief, putting Saturn there, it wants to turn it into what Saturn loves, which is a control program of some kind. And that's what I like to call the fake unity. Let's just all, go into a computer chip. So I also think there has been a huge overemphasis on Aquarius being only about technology. And there's so many different kinds of technology, even if we went down the technological rabbit hole, many of which have been suppressed, many of the technologies that could be used by human beings. But the attempt to actually control everyone in a fake unity makes a lie of what my mentor Rajar described. And if there's anybody who could be authoritative on this, it would be Rajar, who is Aquarius moon. Okay. So basically he has a lot of Aquarius insight. And his expression is entirely about unity in diversity, or also could be, using his exact expression, the planetarization of consciousness, the precise synthesis of merging individual consciousness into a planetary consciousness, which I think is the higher expression of what Aquarius can be. And it's also the case that Aquarius, the sign, is, it's not it's a human sign, so it's a man or a woman. I love on the internet now that many of the images for Aquarius, they have a woman pouring the water. I really like that, even though the original image in Samaria was definitely one of the god figures, Ea or Enki. But it could be just a human pouring the waters of life. That would be the original constellation. But that universal quality, the universal quality is definitely there for Aquarius, although it's been very rightly seen as air, not as water. Expanding awareness, higher view, higher love, higher truth, higher meaning. Well, then what would be the shadow of this? I kind of alluded to this early on. I used to give talks back in the 70s, and I would ask the group, what's the shadow of Aquarius? And the answer to that was, Aquarius doesn't think there's a shadow. That's the shadow. And so we actually, in the handbook, have a list of the shadow of Aquarius. Easily, light polarized, denies there is a shadow, focuses only on positive thinking, only on positive affirmations, denies anything is wrong and everything is unfolding as it should, as a spiritual bypass, is too detached, overly cool and aloof, checks out, splits off, disconnected from the body and emotions, can't process ordinary human feelings and experiences, doesn't want anyone to mess too closely with their energy field, extreme environmental sensitivity, can't handle the earth experience. We've spoken many other times regarding all the different mythic storylines that lead up to Aquarius. We won't do that now. I'm wanting to bring maybe this back to what would be its essence and to not be confused by the various contents. So even in the late 60s, combined with the understanding of the dawning of the age of Aquarius, actually was its connection to the earth, the indigenous approach, animism, everything is alive. And yet even then, there was a tendency that it was moving in the direction of too much technology, of too much detachment from the human experience. So actually, it's a very tricky thing, as I keep noticing with Aquarius, fake unity or real unity and diversity. The sanctity of the individual within a larger democratic overview. What happens with revolutionary ideals if it becomes the mob, if it becomes a control program, and so on. These are the kind of things that I'm hoping to share with you here, so you can go into your own deep dive and exploration around this. Maybe one thing I didn't quite mention is that it is true, when we spoke of those two waves, the one about absolutely unique, almost always, and I don't even know a time in history where this would have been different, that uniqueness is always on the leading edge, avant-garde, progressive, going into new territory, standing apart from the crowd. Again, it's that weird paradox in Aquarius of wanting to be unique and then also the collectivity kind of thing associated with it. One other thought to maybe take this deep dive further, a little further. We mentioned that to really understand Aquarius, you have to include Leo. So therefore, we bring up what's called the Aquarian Dispensation. Maybe some of you in metaphysical circles have heard about the Aquarian Dispensation. This actually goes back to Egyptian times, and actually some say pre-Egyptian times, where at that time in history, Leo was more in ascendancy. And so you had elite groups, you had bloodlines, you had the family of the pharaoh, you had the original Brahmin caste that would have had a different bloodline than the other people. So you would have original royalty or these elite groups that had, because they had a different bloodline, they had two objectives: serve the people, but also model for humanity the best qualities that a fully authentic and complete human being could be, connected to divinity. You know, they were a spark of divinity. They knew they were gods and goddesses, as it were. But they also knew that that would fall into darkness, that the shadow of Leo would become incredibly dominant. The shadow of Leo, of course, being I'm God and you're not, you know, kind of false class and false, you know, we're better than others and so on, and separation. And well, we know that today with fake celebrities, fake royalty and all of that. But they knew, the more evolved of those individuals knew that there would come a time, and they called it the Aquarian Dispensation, when the program for infinity that only a few had would be spread to the entirety of the human race. So therefore, this is one of the things that splits what have been called New Age people from more mainstream Christianity. Because mainstream Christianity would say we're waiting for the return of Jesus, right? While the Aquarian transmission says that it's all of us, you know, it's like all of us now have the program for infinity. We all have a Christ consciousness connection. And we could even say at this point, because we now see that both masculine and feminine is in all the 12, we're actually looking at what's called Christos Sophia. So what would be the female version of what sounds like, you know, masculine imagery of Aquarius? And it is put on the, you know, the archetypally masculine side of the wheel. Air, you know, very left brain and, you know, very heady and, you know, the sign of scientists and so on. However, the female expression, which in our evolving view now, the version of the feminine that has been left out all too often is the Sophic version, or in India called the Saraswati version, you know, which is really about knowledge and art and music, and it's not your Mother Mary stuff. It's something rather different. It's a, you know, that's why they say Christos Sophia, and the inversion of the feminine principle that's happened in the last 5,500 years. So and I love, again, the fact that so many images of Aquarius now are female images, as we're getting the goddess expression of it. I think there's a bit of Kuan Yin in there also, and we'll notice that with the fact that Jupiter in the sign of Aquarius will go into a Pisces next, but it will actually have a journey into Pisces for a while, go back into Aquarius, and then fully into Pisces. Anyway, that's some of this dive into the way Aquarius has been seen, the different possible contents, and hopefully we got into some of the essence of it. Do you have some thoughts on, Mary, as far as what I might have left out, or some thoughts here that where you'd like to maybe take this inquiry where I haven't so far?
Well, one of the things about Aquarius that I super appreciate is just that connection to the universal values. And I think that higher love, higher meaning, higher truth is something for the collective to come into in all of the archetypes, in terms of, like you said, Aquarius is both the leading edge and connected to consciousness. To me, what that kind of says is it's leading and bringing forward what is needed for consciousness to evolve to another level. And that would include all the other archetypes. So, yeah, I mean, I know they're all equal. All of the archetypes are equal, but I think Aquarius has a unique position here.
Totally.
Yeah. And
in fact, it's actually often, if you'll remember, represented in our in-person circles, where when we make the wheel, or if we give a diagram of the different archetypes of the masculine and the different archetypes of the feminine, they all fall on to a fourfold structure, save one. So by the time we put this up on the board or have a slide on it, oh, where's Aquarius? Well, Aquarius is like on the outside. It can be anywhere it wants to be. You know, it becomes the innovative, leading edge energy for all of them, actually. You know, and so I think that's why it's rather easy when you look at Aquarius to be able to easily see female and male expressions. You know, it's definitely human, but you know, that brings up the one of his shadows, which basically the detachment and the coldness, and but that's because it's not a feeling function sign. So it's really having to do the universal ideals of what it is to be human, the version of our higher consciousness, and maybe that would be a good way to transition into talking about a sign in a mystery school utterly different from Aquarius, which is that the Aquarian approach can actually seem to operate without even the need for a body. It represents the aspect of what it is to be in creation as an element of consciousness. You see. So in India it would be called the chit. It would in Sat Chit Ananda, Aquarius would be part of the chit, CHIT. That the one reality, when it manifests into three, and one of the three is that it's aware, consciousness. You know, the ground of awareness. But boy, when we get into Taurus, we get the extreme contrast. You know, where just as Aquarius is kind of up and out, it's from the earth and water dimension, and it's on a path of evolution, we could say. Taurus is like, if we had to pick one, it's the one that is most about involution, spirit into matter. Earth is, obviously it's an earth sign, but it is also in that self-interest or self-exploration category. So what is Taurus about? Well, it's about exploring sensation, exploring pleasure, exploring what is possible for the body to experience for its own sake. Okay, so it's like an investigation of that without judgment against it. And as I mentioned, I think earlier, it is one of the mystery schools that I think has been least understood in modern times. What is Taurus? I mean, but basically, if we look at, how about this list? You know, lazy, stubborn, rigid, gluttony, attached to acquisition, security issues, resists change, addicted receivers, going up to the point of taking, indiscriminate receiving, stuck on the material plane, strives toward cultural perception of beauty, narcissistic, and so on. Actually, all four of the self-interest ones can be put in that category of, you know, in the spectrum somewhere of narcissism. I mean, Aquarius, of course, believes they're right, you know, and of course, Taurus believes their tastes are obviously the best, you know. But this actually stems from the original essence of the Taurus mystery school. And I take it back, actually, although it could go way further back. I mean, I can give you some examples that have a way further back, particularly the masculine version of Taurus, which is very little understood today, really, except through the shadow expressions. But more recently, in Greece, there was what was called Epicureanism.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually a materialistic mystery school. It said basically, we don't need any metaphysics. We can actually have our enlightenment happen through our experience with our sensory body, with what it is to be incarnate in the body. And so the Epicureanism would say, we are pursuing pleasure as long as possible, as deep as possible. And there was also a version of it, a set of instructions that we could translate today as kind of like a moderation, meaning that you don't avoid pleasure, but if there's something that takes you beyond feeling good, don't do that, which is kind of like the opposite then of Scorpio, where Taurus might say, well, using a standard example, I'm not at all trying to say Taurus is about this example, but let's say 2 glasses of really well-made high-end wine feels good, but a 3rd glass is a massive headache. The Taurus approach would be never to do that. While Scorpio might say, no, my job is to see what 4 or 5 are like, to go to the edge and beyond. But Taurus is moderate, but not afraid of exploring pleasure and enjoyment for its own sake. And as I know that, would you like me to, you have the book in front of you? Do you want to read it, or shall I read? Why don't you read the quote?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Pull that up. Ancient beauty, as it were, shall pour over the land. Ancient, aboriginal, primal beauty, beauty that shall stop the mind, beauty from all past time blended into the now. Beauty of unprecedented splendor shall flow across the land. Primordial beauty has always been with us. Only now are we prepared to see, to be. And to be is such a beautiful part of that, because Taurus is being present. And it just reminds me, when I look at something incredibly beautiful, like a landscape, that's exactly where it takes me, in that state of awe, silence, and presence. And I really understand more fully now that that is Taurus, that sensation. Not just being in the body to experience pleasure, but being in that pure state of light when you connect. Yeah.
It's actually really similar to the 3 primary characteristics of the pre-patriarchal Aphrodite. Mm-hmm. One of which was to be an expert at beauty and aesthetics. Yeah. But it was not, and this is so incredibly important to understand, that original centered on self-exploration thing was there, where she would experience within herself beauty and aesthetics and set those standards from her own experience. So therefore, it was not trying to correspond to a cultural image of beauty. It was not attempting to turn on the men. There was no other motive other than the appreciation and savoring of that capacity to appreciate beauty and aesthetics, and basically knowing what feeling, I shouldn't say knowing, experiencing and actually discriminating what's good, what is of the good, what is of the beauty way. The other characteristics attributed to that goddess and to that archetypal expression had to do with personal intimacy, but not intimacy in a householder sense. It wasn't intimacy to bring kids in. It wasn't intimacy to satisfy a marriage vow. It was intimacy as art, you know, celebrating intimacy is something worth having for its own sake. And I'm not just talking about sex. I mean, there's the intimacy. Well, the word "in" is in there, right?
Right.
You know?
Into
And,
yeah.
and then there's the receiving part. And clearly one can see how the over-identification and the addiction could come there, but we tend to forget, and this is such a big feature of a lot of the sessions I do, there'll be an individual who does not even understand that being a good receiver, and I do not mean an indiscriminate receiver, because you know part of the definition is to know what's good. But to be a receiver, a good receiver is a gift to a giver. The best thing you can possibly give to somebody who's legitimately a giver is to be a good receiver. And that's not taking. It's actually a way of valuing the giver by being open to receiving. And boy, I'll tell you, there's even more than the giver archetypes. It's so common in our current world to not understand this, you know, to think you have to keep earning the capacity to receive or the willingness to receive. And Taurus reminds us that just being present and having that aesthetic sense and valuing receiving and, you know, healthy receivership. Your point there is really well taken, that it's about being, not doing. And one can see then, after a time, how judgments can come in. Many of those judgments about the shadow side of Taurus are, I mean, every one of these, you can see how this could develop. If the essence of Taurus is to go deeply into something, as long as possible, as deep as possible, and in moderation, well then, why would you want to change? I mean, why would you want to change to something entirely different? If you find something good, you just go into it more deeply and you stay with it longer. So that then after a time becomes an instinctual habit that can be judged as being unwilling to change or being lazy, which I do not think has anything whatsoever to do with the essence of the Taurus mystery school. Fascinating thing is, if you know, I mean, if you look at it as a revolutionary force, there actually, particularly for men, there has been more allowance for Aquarius, particularly since the advent of science and technology, more avenue for Aquarius. But Taurus, there's a lot of judgment against this, a lot of misunderstanding about it. To just be able to savor and enjoy what it is to be a human being in a body. And we've said this for years in the school, which is the Garden of Eden without the fall. The ability to experience the abundance, the cornucopia of the garden without having to prove it or without being guilty about it, or you know, the fall you know, radically changed that. So to build a new world, to build a new garden planet is the objective here. Now, what else do we want to? Yes, so I know you have you have more Taurus than me.
Yeah.
I do have I do have the Taurus job in the Capricorn tribe, you know, so it's sort of that Taurian appreciation of different forms of knowledge and history, but that's not the same as having Venus in Taurus or or having Taurus rising or Taurus moon. So I'm sure you have a few other things you might want to say about Taurus here in our deep dive.
What I would offer is, because I had a wounded Taurus moon, I've gotten to kind of learn from that starting point how to rejuvenate some of what was lost in the collective with Taurus. And a lot of that has been reclaiming your own sensual self, the second chakra, reclaiming, clearing distortions and guilt and shame that our culture has put on to that. Assisting in creating heaven on earth and reconnecting to this planet as a living being, as part of us, as part of that connectivity, as part of the deep love that comes up through us from the subliminal realm. Those are all such powerful things that I had no awareness on coming onto this planet. And a lot of shamanic astrology has empowered me to really investigate, step into, incorporate a lot of this into my own life, and to fully be. When I lived in a culture that was totally about doing, and I had to cop to the fact that I was addicted to doing. So living in the moment and appreciating without fear of change, the ever-changing dynamics of nature. To me, Taurus is the ability to love all stages and aspects of love, not just the spring and the blossoming, but all of it, because they're all equally valuable in this great cycle of life once you realize that it's a cycle that comes back, renews. So that was
it's kind of like, just like Leo's gift to Aquarius is to keep reminding Aquarius of the sovereignty of the self and not the surrender into fake unity or the Borg. Well, actually, for Taurus, the contribution there of Scorpio, really, to give it permission to really be in the world. That there's nothing wrong with being physical, with being in the body, and for the pleasure and the ecstasy of that experience. So they both contribute to each other. We did Scorpio in a previous one, so you can maybe go back and hear what we had to say about Scorpio. We did not, did we do, no, we didn't do Leo.
Have not.
Right, well, we'll do that. But the reason why we wanted to talk about these two today was because of this very unique and unusual situation that was happening in 2021 of Uranus. And Uranus has characteristics that are in many ways similar to Aquarius in the sign that it's square to, Taurus. So we have to remember there is a 90-degree angle, a square between these two. So in conventional, ordinary astrology, they are contrary. They're in contrast. There's some kind of crisis between the two of them. They have what we, on a bad day, might be considered to be some kind of a conflict. Our job is to synthesize these energies, and now to have Uranian, revolutionary, innovative, avant-garde, leading edge, unique, ahead of time imagery in the sign of Taurus. It reminds, it's like you got to bring the innovation into the earth dimension, into our experience of the body, into the experience of the earth herself. And I believe you were one of the individuals that noticed, and I thought it was a tremendous insight, that the new emerging exponents of terrain theory, like Dr. Zach Bush and a whole host of others that are out there, are to me wonderful expressions of this Uranian in Taurus thing that's going to be still present for years now, because Uranus stays in a sign for 7 years, bringing like innovation, new science discoveries into something that's valuing the entire biome, the virome, the environment that we're in. Completely revolutionizing and overthrowing in a revolution the germ theory that makes us be afraid of life. You know, I mean, I think that's part of what Uranus in Taurus is about. And then we have the Saturn in Aquarius, which the dark side of which, you know, the control side of it is trying to to capture Aquarius, you know, into digital, you know, or into you know, into transhumanism, you know. I mean, in my opinion here right now, which is the hubris really of Aquarius, you see, and if Saturn, when it is in Aquarius, is loaded with the hubris that we don't have to be organic, we don't have to be even in a body, we don't have to be human. So that would be the pretension and the hubris of transhumanism. We don't even need to die. Well, Taurus and Scorpio would suggest that one of the, and shamanism, the whole path of shamanism, and most legitimate spiritual traditions see that the deathing and birthing are part of the same thing, part of the eternal return. To be afraid of death is as far as I'm concerned, for these transhumanists, they're like why? I mean, like they're how many of them go into nature? You know, they wouldn't even care if we became a mono species, you know. And so the only thing we knew was just other humans and our minds and our technology. So this will become, in this contrast between Taurus and Uranus, Saturn in Aquarius, but then Uranus and Taurus, the most profound investigation and inquiry over these next years. This is going to be huge in 2021. Yes. So what kind of a planet do we want to have? What kind of a human society do we want to have? Unity and diversity, what does that actually look like? Is it togetherness, but a celebration of our uniqueness? And this goes all the way back to what I thought in the late 60s was going to be something that, quote, would win out. I mean, if I could look at it that way, you know, in our own arrogance at that time and thinking our views were the right ones. But it was the thing that actually was the foundation of shamanic astrology. Be your archetype. Go beyond the cultural programming. You know, find your place on the wheel. And it's not like everybody else. Right. So be your archetype and then to discover what that is. And that's the function of our school, to help people find out not only what their archetypes are, but what their, you know, mission and purpose statement in life is. So we are at a crossroads, you know, I mean, the different directions the world can take. And our job is, our commitment really is toward the freedom to investigate what it is it really to be human.
Right.
I made a choice. I think people should have the freedom, if they want to live forever as a computer chip, well, they can have the freedom to do that, but I don't want them forcing me to, you know. So I mean, I think privacy, I think having our own individual reality, my body, my choice, and so on, are important Aquarian concepts. And that's the liberty part of it. And in fact, I think that's one thing that both Taurus and Aquarius could agree about. You know, the freedom, the autonomy, but also the sanctity of our physical experience, the value of what it is having a body and having nature and having beauty and having personal intimacy. I mean, I do see here, as we're talking, Mary, there is some quality of intimacy that is possible on a Zoom call. Some quality of intimacy that can be transmitted to people who are hearing one of these presentations. But it pales to what can happen in a circle of living beings sharing connection, their hearts and togetherness, and to be able to see and feel the closeness of physical presence with eyes and heart. We do the best we can with this right now, and since we're doing this right before New Year's, I'm not interested in living on a planet where everybody is in masks and social distancing. You know, I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Maybe some people like that. Yeah, that's kind of the weird thing, you know. I'll just have to bring this up because we're all different. I am a Libra rising, and I know you have a lot of Taurus and Scorpio, and those are all very personal. You know, they all like connection. They like body stuff. But, you know, the people that I've had the easiest time this year, I mean, there may be exceptions to this, but the people who have had the easiest time among my clientele in 2020 has been the people with lots of Aquarius. So, wow, I love doing virtual. I didn't want to see anybody anyway. I like my own space. I like being alone. I don't want anybody to touch me. You know, so I mean, so some of them can actually really have breakthroughs at a time like now. But please don't impose that on everybody, you know. So that's my hope. How about you?
Well, I keep asking the question at this split in the road. Like you say, there's two different ways it could go. But would great mystery confirm that they're both authentic expressions of these archetypes? When I asked it that way, I don't think they both would be considered by great mystery to be authentic expressions, because they are losing, I think, some of the essence of what Taurus and Aquarius are. So that's kind of my saving grace. And I'll kind of end on that note. I know it could go one way for a while, swing back the other way for a while, be split in two directions for some populations on the planet, not all. But truly in my heart, I think great mystery is calling the shots. And she's had these 12 expressions, these beautiful expressions with masculine and feminine versions as 24 dynamic expressions of herself. And I would think she'd opt to keep the essence of those.
and kind of as a final thought here, when I've given talks that are somewhere in this category of talking about these issues, there are those that will say, please, Daniel, don't see it as either this or that, but rather, is there some kind of synthesis between, I'm now projecting far greater progressive possibilities of a new Saturn with Aquarius. They're basically where Aquarius is truly revisioned in a way similar to Rajar, a different version of Saturn in Aquarius, the planetarization of consciousness, unity, and diversity, and having those thoughts and ideals synthesized with these new innovations in the biome, in the earth, the rejuvenation of the planet, and then that even includes all the ideas around free energy. You know, the new technologies that can be actually used for the benefit of the whole planet and all its peoples. So some kind of merging between the two. I think it's one of the things we certainly advocate for here. And then to be try to remember to be clear that Aquarius is not the Borg. I'm sorry, and it's not transhumanism. That's anti-human. I have to say it, you know. But anyway, here we are again. It was tried once before during the mythic Atlantean time, right? And how did that turn out? You know, so let's advocate a different kind of new Earth here at this point. And we'll be talking about it, as we go through the next year in the school. There's going to be many, many more times to tune into this evolution, hopefully not devolution, of the essence of Taurus and the essence of Aquarius. And you know, thanks for listening, and we are definitely open for your feedback on further inquiry into these really important issues. Stay tuned for next month's vlogcast, which at this moment I don't know for sure what it'll be about. We shall see.
Thank you, Daniel. This has really been a lot of fun. And if, you know, looking back to the first question I asked you earlier today, that, or I was reading that the purpose of being human is to return, to restore the original state of consciousness, which it just keeps playing over and over again for me, that the new emerging essences of our archetypes are really doing that. It's bringing us back to a human form that is imbued with divine grace. And
as you know, from what has been part of the investigation and the renaissance of the sacred work that has happened in the school and my own research, it is my contention that for 300,000 years, I mean, before the things that happened about 5,000, 550, 500 years ago, humans, global humanity was connected to the deeper values of heart and soul that's in our DNA, way more in our DNA than what's happened more recently. So sometimes going forward requires first a renewal, and a renewal is not, as we normally think of, as development and progress. Renewal is taking the great stuff from the past,
yes,
and remembering who we really are.
I think it's still out there. I think shamans already know how to do this, and energy healers know how to work at these higher levels of consciousness. And my guess is, well, it will become more mainstream, and that will be a really beautiful thing. Anyway, Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, indeed. Thanks, Mary. All right. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.